Let's get something straight right now. Avoidants don't leave the same way others do. They don't storm out. They detach. Slowly, silently, subtly, until one day you look up and they're just gone. No explanation, no confrontation, just a closed door you never saw shut. When an avoidant partner decides they're done, they don't always walk away with clarity or confrontation. That's not how they operate. Instead, what they do is far more subtle and honestly more painful. They start rewriting the story of the relationship, slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. But once they start, there's no going back. This is one of the clearest signs they're not coming back. They begin by reframing events, cherry-picking moments that support a narrative where they were the victim, or at least the one who had no choice but to leave. In their new version of the story, you were too needy, always overreacting, or never satisfied. They don't do this because it's the whole truth. They do it because it justifies their exit. If they can convince themselves that the relationship was toxic or that you were the unstable one, they get to avoid their own emotional accountability. And for an avoidant, that emotional distance is everything. They need to feel right in order to feel safe walking away. This isn't always malicious. It's defensive. It's protective. Because let's be honest, avoidants struggle to sit in discomfort. They struggle to confront their own fears of intimacy, vulnerability, and emotional risk. So when the connection starts to feel overwhelming or unpredictable, their mind looks for an out. And the easiest way out, rewrite the past so it aligns with the decision to leave. What makes this so hard to witness, especially if you're the one who tried to love them through their walls, is that their version of events can feel like gaslighting. It can make you question your own memory. You start to wonder, was I really that difficult? Was I actually the problem? That doubt can eat away at your self-esteem, especially when they seem so certain about their side of the story. But here's the truth. This rewriting isn't about accuracy. It's about emotional survival. Avoidants don't want to sit in the grief. They don't want to feel the shame of pushing away someone who genuinely loved them. So instead, they reconstruct the narrative to make themselves feel justified. It's their coping mechanism, their self-protection strategy, and it allows them to close the door without looking back. So if your avoidant ex is suddenly telling people you were controlling, too emotional, or impossible to please, don't take that as the full truth. Take it as a signal. A sign that they've already begun the process of emotional detachment. Because once they convince themselves that leaving was not just necessary, but right, they lock that story in. And when that story becomes their truth, they rarely, if ever, return to the scene they've mentally turned into a mistake. This is hard to accept, but it's also freeing. Because once you see that their version of the past is a form of self-protection, you can stop trying to argue with it. You can stop trying to convince them of your worth. Because when someone rewrites the story to walk away guilt, free, what they're really saying is this: I'm not coming back. I've already let go. When an avoidant cuts off all means of contact, it's not just a breakup. It's a shutdown. And if you've ever loved someone with an avoidant attachment style, you know how devastating that silence can be. The blocking, the unfollowing, the deletion of your number, the complete disappearance. It feels brutal, even cruel. But it's not about punishing you. It's about protecting themselves from the emotional intensity they can no longer manage. Avoidants don't thrive in confrontation. They don't want to have a conversation about closure. They're not looking to process or revisit the relationship. What they're doing is creating emotional safety by severing the tie completely. For someone with an avoidant attachment pattern, even the idea of ongoing contact can feel like a threat to their emotional regulation. It reactivates the part of them that feels overwhelmed, exposed, and vulnerable. So instead of risking another surge of intimacy, they shut the door tight and lock it from the inside. This is where a lot of people get stuck. You might think they just need space. Maybe they'll unblock me eventually. maybe they'll come around. But there's a difference between needing space and building a wall. When an avoidant blocks you across the board and makes zero effort to reopen that communication, even after time has passed, it's a sign they've moved on emotionally. That silence isn't temporary, it's structural. It's also a way for them to avoid discomfort. Because let's be real, maintaining any kind of connection post-breakup forces them to face something they don't want to deal with. Regret, guilt, shame, or even unresolved feelings. That's risky territory for an avoidant. So rather than face that, they choose disconnection as their shield. No texts. No DMs, no happy birthday out of nowhere. Just a hard stop. Sometimes they'll justify this by saying they don't want to lead you on, or that's better for both of you. And in their mind, it is. They believe cutting you off is the most efficient way to move forward without having to emotionally explain themselves. But what they're really doing is avoiding emotional accountability. It's easier to block than to say, I hurt you, and I don't know how to face that. And here's what you need to hear. This kind of cutoff is not a test. It's not a secret invitation for you to prove your love or wait patiently for their return. When an avoidant has made this kind of final move, they're telling you as clearly as they know how, I'm not coming back. Not because you weren't worthy. Not because you weren't enough. But because staying emotionally connected requires a level of intimacy and vulnerability they've decided they can't handle. So as painful as that silence is, don't fight it. Don't try to decode it. Accept it for what it is, a boundary, not a breadcrumb. And then make a decision for yourself to stop waiting, to stop hoping, and to start reclaiming your own peace. Because when someone slams the door, your healing begins by choosing not to keep knocking. When an avoidant jumps into another relationship right after the breakup, it can feel like the ultimate betrayal. You're left grieving, spinning, trying to make sense of what happened. Meanwhile, they're already holding someone else's hand, posting smiling pictures, and acting like your relationship never existed. But don't be fooled by the surface. This isn't about love. This is about escape. Avoidants are conflict, averse not just with others, but with themselves. They don't want to sit with their emotions. They don't want to unpack what went wrong, feel the grief, or examine how they contributed to the loss. That's way too vulnerable. So instead of doing the hard emotional work of healing, they jump quickly, sometimes instantly, right into someone new. This new person is often what's called a replacement bond. It's not necessarily about genuine compatibility or deep emotional connection. It's about comfort, distraction, and control. This new relationship gives the avoidant the illusion that they've moved on. It lets them bypass the pain. It gives them a clean slate, free from the emotional intensity and unresolved issues of the previous relationship. But what hurts the most for you, the one left behind, is how fast it happens. You might be asking yourself, did I mean anything? Was it all fake? Were they emotionally cheating? Those are valid questions, and the pain you feel is real. But you need to understand that this new connection isn't proof that they've found the one. It's proof they're avoiding the emotional fallout of the breakup. It's easier for them to start fresh with someone new than to face the wreckage of what just ended. And here's something important. Avoidants often idealize new partners at the beginning. That honeymoon phase is their comfort zone. It feels safe because it hasn't been tested yet. There are no expectations, no emotional demands, no history. But eventually, that fantasy breaks. And if they haven't done the internal work, they'll start to feel the same discomfort that made them pull away from you. That's the avoidance cycle. Connect, withdraw, replace, repeat. So what does this mean for you? It means their quick rebound is not a reflection of your worth. It's not a sign that you were easily replaced. It's a coping strategy, a way for them to stay emotionally numb and in control. Because being alone, being still, and being accountable for their feelings, that terrifies them far more than jumping into something new. If they've rushed into another relationship and shown no signs of looking back, take it as information, not as rejection. They're not coming back, not because you weren't enough, but because facing what you two shared is too emotionally risky for someone who's wired to avoid depth once it starts to feel unsafe. The best thing you can do is stop watching, stop waiting, and stop wondering if their new relationship will fail. Instead, focus on yourself. Use the space they ran from to finally confront your own healing. Because while they're distracting themselves, you have the opportunity to truly grow. One of the most telling signs that an avoidant is truly done and not coming back is when they stop responding to the emotional triggers that used to hook them. You know the ones: the heartfelt texts, the angry messages, the subtle social media posts that you just know they'll see. In the past, these things would spark a reaction. Maybe they'd lash out. Maybe they'd reappear just to test the waters. Maybe they'd like your story, send a vague text, or respond with irritation. But they responded. That reaction gave you hope. It made you believe there was still something left between you. But now, nothing. Total silence. You text something vulnerable and there's no reply. You block and unblock them. They don't flinch. You post a selfie that would have made them spiral a few months ago, and it's like they didn't even see it. That's silence. That's not just detachment. That's emotional disengagement at the deepest level. And if you're seeing it, I want you to hear me clearly. They're not just ignoring you. They've unplugged. For an avoidant, emotional triggers are normally landmines. They hate being cornered by feelings, especially when those feelings threaten their sense of control or independence. That's why they used to react when you poke the wound. Whether they responded with anger, coldness, or even brief affection, the fact that they reacted meant they were still emotionally invested, still internally entangled in the bond. But when those same triggers no longer work, when your energy, your words, your presence can't penetrate their emotional shield, that's when they've gone into a deeper level of shutdown. It means they've emotionally numbed themselves to you. And they've done it deliberately. Not because you didn't matter, but because engaging with you now feels like a threat to the identity they're trying to rebuild without you. Avoidants are masters of compartmentalization. And when they finally decide to close the door on a relationship, they often do so by mentally placing you in a locked emotional box, one they have no intention of opening again. That's why they stop reacting, because to them, reacting is reattaching, and reattaching feels dangerous. So instead, they opt for dead silence. This doesn't mean they don't feel anything. It means they've buried those feelings so deeply they refuse to let them surface. Because in their mind, to respond to your trigger is to reopen a door they're determined to keep shut. And once they've convinced themselves that distance is safer than intimacy, your emotional attempts no longer hold power. So when you find yourself trying to get a response through anger, vulnerability, or silence of your own, and they still don't respond, stop. That lack of reaction isn't confusion. It's clarity. It's a message written in silence that says, I've already left emotionally. I'm not coming back. Your healing begins when you stop performing for their attention and start reclaiming your peace. Because when your triggers no longer touch them, it's time to stop reaching out and start reaching inward. When an avoidant shows absolutely zero curiosity about your life after the breakup, it's not indifference. It's intentional distance. And while it can feel like they never cared, the reality is more complex. Avoidants don't handle lingering emotional connections well. They don't want reminders of what they lost or confrontations with feelings they're trying to suppress. So they don't ask. They don't check in. They don't stalk your stories or casually reach out just to see how you're doing. They emotionally disconnect by cutting off the part of themselves that wants to know. And that silence, that disinterest, it hurts, because if you love them deeply, you probably find yourself still wondering how they are. Maybe you fight the urge to check their social media to see if they're okay, if they've changed, or if they miss you. So when you realize they haven't made the slightest effort to know anything about you, where you are, who you're with, how you're doing, it can feel like a slap in the face. You think, how can someone just erase me like that? Did I matter at all? But here's the uncomfortable truth. Avoidants cope by detaching. Not gradually. Not gently, but abruptly. To stay emotionally regulated, they convince themselves that what's in the past should stay in the past. That includes you, your life, your progress, your feelings. Curiosity would mean opening that door again. It would mean risking connection, risking regret, and most importantly, risking vulnerability. And avoidants aren't wired to deal well with any of that once they've checked out. That's why they don't watch your stories. That's why they don't ask mutual friends about you. That's why they don't text, just wondering how you've been, because doing so would make them feel something. And they've already decided feeling is unsafe. It's not that they don't care at all. It's that they've shut down the part of themselves that cares in order to move on without emotional chaos. What makes this hard for you is that it feels like closure never comes. You want some signal that it mattered, that they noticed you've changed, that they see your growth or regret their decision. But their silence is the closure. Their complete lack of curiosity tells you everything. They've disconnected from the version of themselves that was attached to you. That version no longer exists in their day-to-day life. So instead of waiting for them to care again, take that silence as a gift. Yes, it's a painful one, but it's a clear one. If they're not watching, not wondering, not reaching out, it's not your job to prove your value. It's your job to recognize it on your own. The relationship is over. And if they're not curious about your life now, it means they're not part of the story you're meant to write next. Let that be your power. Use their absence as space to become someone who no longer needs to be seen by them to feel seen. Because their silence doesn't diminish your worth. It simply frees you to move on without apology. So if you're seeing these signs, the rewritten past, the digital erasure, the emotional silence, the replacement, the lack of curiosity, the dead bond, it's time to stop hoping. Not because you're not worthy, not because you're not lovable, but because this is the moment where you stop chasing someone who's already left emotionally and you start choosing, whoa, you deserve someone who doesn't run from connection, someone who fights for it. Let this be your turning point. Because if they're not coming back, maybe that's the best thing that ever happened to you.